The House and Senate passed dueling pension plans. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we discuss Illinois politics and government. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues Magazine, and joining me this week is longtime Statehouse Observer Mike Lawrence. Mike, glad to have you here.
Good to be with you.
Well, we're seeing a lot going on in these kind of final weeks of session. Of course, the adjournment date is set for May 31st. Let's hope, knock on wood, that that we see that happen. Both the House and the Senate have passed their own versions of pension reform. Of course, leaders in the House and the Senate, as well as Governor Quinn, have set pension reform as their goal for this session. Mike, we're seeing two different approaches to how this should be done. Can you lay out a little bit the difference between what House Speaker Michael Madigan would like to see and what Senate President John Cullerton is pushing?
Well, Speaker Madigan is really going hard on the so-called cost of living increase, the 3% per year that compounds. And that is fertile territory if you really want to save money and get at the unfunded liability. The Cullerton plan, which was worked out with several of the major unions, basically gives choices. Now, some of the spokespeople and officials for the Retired Teachers Association really depict it as a lose-lose kind of choice. But the Cullerton plan reflects the view that if you do give choices, that you enhance the chance of the Supreme Court upholding the constitutionality, given what many people have felt for decades was an absolute ban on tampering with those pensions. But the Cullerton plan will not save nearly as much money, or another way of looking at it, won't make nearly as big a dent in the unfunded liability. In fact, the estimates are it would amount to about 1/3 of what the Madigan plan would save. And I think it's fair to say either plan will be challenged in the courts. Senator Cullerton believes his plan has a greater chance of passing constitutional muster, but that really would remain to be seen if, in fact, the Cullerton plan prevails.
Well, and as you said, the cost of living increases are fertile territory because they make up the largest portion of the cost of the benefits, and there are those who believe that the COLAs maybe are not guaranteed by the Constitution.
Yes, there is that view, and I guess I'm one of those who believes that the COLAs are one area where significant changes could be made and not be held as unconstitutional. It's called a COLA, Jamey, but it's really a pay increase. And I say that as an annuitant and recipient of that. The fact of the matter is it's 3% each and every year, compounded, regardless of what's happening in the economy. Social Security recipients know that the amount of increase they might get in a given year is based on a consumer price index. And a few years ago there was quite a ruckus because in the midst of the recession, the cost of living did not increase, and it took action by the president to provide some amount of an increase. But again, that is tied to inflation. the state pension increases are not tied to inflation.
But one of the criticisms of Madigan's plan is that the COLAs under the plan, once you reach a certain level, would just be a flat COLA, so that would not be tied to inflation either. Why not, or why do you think lawmakers are maybe avoiding tying the COLAs to an inflation number that might change over time?
Well, because that makes a lot of their constituents unhappy.
Because it could go either way.
Yeah, exactly. And if you tie it to, let's say, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, at least looking back over the last several years, that would be less than 3%, significantly less than 3%. So it's Madigan's plan also, as you know, it raises the retirement age for current employees, and it caps the salary that can be used for computing the retirement benefit. Those are pretty substantial changes, and that's why you're seeing the Madigan plan, or at least estimates on how much of a difference it would make, emerge as one that, as I say, would take a much bigger dent out of the unfunded liability than the Cullerton plan. Now, conversely, it would also hit retirees and prospective retirees harder.
Well, Cullerton's argument to kind of counter that savings argument is that if that plan is tossed out by the Supreme Court, which he believes that it would be, the savings would be zero and the state would have to start over from square one, possibly a year from whenever the bill is passed. I mean, Mike, what do you have to say about that? Is a safe bet but a smaller savings a good option here, or should lawmakers just go for what they can get and leave it up to the court? A lot of folks are arguing in the General Assembly that it's not really our job to try to decide what the court will like, that we should just pass the best bill.
I wouldn't call it a safe bet. I'd call it maybe a better bet. And I think Senator Cullerton has been careful in that regard. He has said it's less risky if it goes to the court. In other words, that the court is more likely to uphold it because it does offer choices, and it is not as big a hit on either prospective retirees or current retirees.
So we're seeing a similar situation to maybe what we've seen with the budgets in the last few years, where Cullerton and Madigan take very public and differing stances on a big issue. Mike, what do you see happening here? In the past, the House's budget has eventually been accepted by the Senate, but Cullerton has really taken a strong stance on this. Where do you see this going, and if he does back down, how?
Well, there may be a way through negotiations that Cullerton can claim that he had a significant impact if the Madigan approach prevails. I don't see that happening the other way, where if there are compromises, and yet it's essentially the Cullerton plan that would pass, I think Madigan would not look like his efforts had succeeded in large measure. I think they. I'm going to assume right now that both Senator Cullerton, President Cullerton, and Speaker Madigan are serious about doing something here, and that a majority of their members are serious about it. And if they are, I think they could well work something out. Now, the other dynamic here, and certainly it's Senator Cullerton will determine the fate of the House-passed bill in the Senate, but it's conceivable that Madigan over in the Senate could get a coalition of Senate Republicans and some House Democrats, or Senate Democrats, I'm sorry. So it's, as usual, at this point of the session with a major issue, it's up in the air. But I do think it's significant now that we've had plans passed by both houses to address the pension problem. I don't see any alternative to squarely addressing that problem if we're going to talk about responsible governance and really get the state out of the terrible, terrible situation it's in. And as you know this pension problem impacts the budget substantially, and as long as it goes unresolved, I think we're going to look at funding for education and other critical services being in real jeopardy. I mean, if you look at it today, the schools and human services have not only been cut, but their payments have been delayed, and the toll really on the future of this state is already substantial. And if this pension situation goes unresolved, I really fear that Illinois will definitely find itself in the backwaters of the states.
Cullerton's plan, as we've said, has union backing. That seems kind of substantial. The unions have come a long way on this plan from what they were originally proposing. How much does that matter for moving this plan forward? They said yesterday that if any their support, they're not comfortable with any changes to this plan. Does the union support carry a lot of weight as lawmakers are considering these?
Well, I think the unions are influential, particularly on the Democrat side, and the Democrats have majorities in both houses. But I also understand that the unions at this point would take a position like that, and that wouldn't necessarily guarantee they would stay there. It would depend. It would depend on what is worked out. But the union leaders are politicians in their own right, small p maybe. They have constituents. Mm-hmm. And if they want to remain in the leadership of their union, they've got to do things that and take positions that reassure their members that they're being effective leaders who are responsive to the concerns of the rank and file.
I was kind of joking today, this time last year, no one really wanted to take a vote on pension reform, and now it's like pension reform bills are raining from the skies. What do you think has changed? Do you think it's just lawmakers coming to grips with what you said about the way that the unfunded liability is impacting the state, or do you think it's more Speaker Madigan coming out with a strong stance on a bill, or a combination of both?
I think it's a combination, Jamie. I think it's becoming clear all the time that if this does not get resolved, other critical areas in the state budget are going to be in even deeper trouble than they are now. And frankly, they're in pretty deep trouble now. At the same time, I think the Speaker has decided that the timing is right to move forward with something substantial. Again, I am basing my remarks on a hope that Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton are serious about getting something done in a major way about this problem, and that it's not about putting members on roll calls that may help them get reelected, and yet the bills they're voting on are becoming law and making a difference.
And you keep emphasizing that. Is that because in the past, we've seen one chamber send a bill over and the other chamber send a bill over, and both claim victory and nothing is actually done? Is that the history that's making you kind of preface that you're hoping this is an earnest effort?
Exactly.
Okay. And are there things about this time that you see that might indicate that it is indeed an honest effort, or do you think the jury is still out on that?
Well, I think you have to say the jury's still out just because of the history. And I have to say, in connection with that history, or the history of problem solving in Illinois, Speaker Madigan and President Colleton have been major constructive players in solving problems that the state has had through the years. I think they also have been players in not resolving problems and yet trying to make it look like they are, or being in a position where they can blame others for the problems not being solved. But I would hope, particularly in the case of Speaker Madigan, that he would care enough about his legacy to try to get this done before he leaves office. And the other factor here is if his daughter, the Attorney General, is interested in becoming governor, and indications are that she is, I don't think he wants to drop this huge problem in her lap.
All right, well, I think we'll move on from pensions, but we'll definitely be discussing this in the coming weeks, and we'll just have to see what's going to happen. Something pension related today, though. Speaker Madigan is still trying to do what is called the cost shift. Madigan calls it the free lunch, that downstate schools, universities, and community colleges do not cover the full cost for their retiree benefits. The state chips in a substantial amount, whereas the City of Chicago's schools cover most of the cost. The state does chip in a little to the City of Chicago, but it's not nearly as much. Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton would both like to see this changed. It had been part of previous pension proposals, but it was removed because it's just such a controversial issue. Mike, how can they do this without including it in pension reform, without having pension reform as sort of the carrot that might bring some people onto this if they really want pension reform done? Can they find the votes for this without some sort of lure?
Well, you may need the lure. I also think you can get it done if you phase it in over a long period of time. This is not the right time to drop some substantial cost on the local school districts when state funding for education, as I say, has in a real sense eroded over the last several years. And when you have a situation where the money that the schools are getting is arriving real late and causing cash flow problems. But the philosophy of this, the idea that ultimately, at least, the cost for pension benefits is going to be borne by the units that approve those benefits and agree to those benefits, makes a lot of sense. Now, it's interesting that this philosophy has taken hold, at least with some, in the General Assembly, because for years the General Assembly, with respect to firemen and policemen and some other public employees, was approving benefits and basically sending the bill to the local school boards and to local government. So maybe this is an epiphany of sorts for members of the General Assembly. But I felt for a long time that the responsibility for raising benefits should go with the people who are paying for them, or let's say the power to raise benefits should go to the people who actually have to come up with the money to pay for them. And in the end, though, I don't think we should kid ourselves. Taxpayers pay those benefits one way or another, although there are contributions from the employees, but the taxpayers pay it one way or another. The idea here, though, is that if there's accountability at the point where the benefits are approved, it will cause a little more or a lot more consideration of whether those benefits should be granted.
So the possibility might be that we see a phase-in that's very gradual and that maybe even doesn't begin until a few years down the road?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good possibility if anything's going to happen in that regard. And I think that's a responsible approach. I just don't think it's fair for the state to begin sending that bill to school boards, local governments, universities, when the state is way behind in making payments that are due and owing to those entities.
It's hard for the state to tell people to take responsibility for things when they're struggling with their own responsibilities, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Senate, a committee in the Senate passed a medical marijuana bill this week. The Senate still has to take a full vote on it, but the bill has passed in the House already. This issue has come around multiple years lately, gotten really close to passing, and it finally made it through the House. The Senate has approved a medical marijuana bill in about 2 years ago, but it was a different bill, different folks in the Senate. Mike, what do you think? Do we have a chance of seeing this make it through the Senate this year?
It seems to me we have a good chance of seeing that happen, and Governor Quinn has not made a commitment on what he would do with the bill. And
he said he's open-minded, which is a very fun thing for him to say about that. I think he's open-minded about it.
Well, typically governors want to review the language of the bill and consider all the implications, but this, as you indicated, this is an evolving issue. When it was first raised, I think it's pretty clear that legislative majorities were not ready to vote to legalize marijuana to any extent. But there's been some riveting testimony on this. From people who find it as an effective way to ease their pain and discomfort.
I think the quote of the night last night, there was a gentleman testifying that had MS, and there's a list of diseases in the bill that you would have to get medical marijuana, and he said it's a very exclusive club that you don't want to be a member of. I think that was pretty, sums up quite well the folks that are looking for this.
And the other thing that's happened, of course, is that the bill has been tightened and tightened, and the restrictions, and you alluded to this, they have listed conditions where this is allowable. And from what I've read about it, including analyses that have been written by folks from out of state, who would like to see fewer restrictions, they're saying basically that if this bill passes, Illinois will have, if the restrictions are not the tightest in the nation, they're among the tightest in the nation. And so that is part of what's happened here too, that the objections of opponents through the years have been addressed, although there are still opponents, including the Chiefs of Police Association, which is concerned about the issue of highway safety. And their representative made that opposition known, but I'm not dismissing it. I don't think the legislature is dismissing it, but it seems to me the train's on the track here and rolling. And I kind of doubt that that bill is going to be changed much more, and I think the chances are very good that it will pass, and I might add, become law.
Well, some of the Republicans that are concerned with it have said that they see it as possibly opening the door to eventually legalizing marijuana in Illinois, or sort of a once the genie is out of the bottle, how do we put it back in? But do you think this bill is probably restrictive enough that those concerns are maybe a little exaggerated, or will we have to wait and see?
Yeah, it's interesting because whenever you have legislation that is controversial, that's one of the arguments that is made, or are made. The fact of the matter is that it could lead ultimately to more expansive legal use of marijuana in Illinois. It has in some other states.
And there are definitely proponents of that in the state.
Yeah, and so you know, if you're an opponent, that is a credible argument to make. But the bill before the legislature is one that does establish restrictions, severely limits who can use it, who can prescribe it, and that's what they're voting on. That's what's before them. And the issue of wider use of marijuana, wider legal use of marijuana, is one for another day.
Well, the sponsor of that bill says that he expects to bring it up for a vote next week in the Senate. So I'm sure that if they do, we'll be talking about it next week on Capitol View, as well as pensions and the budget and many other issues. But I'd like to thank my guest, Mike Lawrence, for being on the show this week.
Good to be with you, as always.
We thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.